wind hurt. It cut through her dress, through the years, through everything she'd buried since the day they threw her out. Evelyn Hart had stopped counting the miles once her boots tore open and the boy's steps began to drag. Now there was only one thought left in her head. Get him somewhere warm before he stops talking. Jonas wasn't crying anymore. That scared her more than the cold. "Keep walking, baby," she whispered, but her own voice came out cracked, more prayer than order. She'd never begged for herself, but for him. She'd beg the devil if she had to. And that's when she saw it. A faint yellow light flickering against the wind, far across the plain. A cabin maybe, a barn, a place where someone still lived. Luke Calder was chopping wood when he heard the knock. Not a knock, really, more like someone's hand giving up halfway through. He opened the door and there she was, thin, pale, eyes too proud for begging, but too desperate to pretend otherwise. And the boy, just a shadow behind her skirt? Evelyn didn't even wait for him to speak. "Please," she said, her lips trembling. "Take my boy, feed him. He's all I've got left." Luke stood there silent. There were things a man remembered no matter how hard he tried not to. The smell of fever, the sound of a cough that wouldn't stop, the way a small hand used to reach for his. The same hand that had gone cold one night long ago. He looked at the boy, then at the woman. "Where's your husband?" "Buried near Willow Creek," she said quietly. "And if you're fixing to ask what sin I paid for, I don't rightly know. Maybe being left behind." That answer did something to him, something he didn't expect. The woman wasn't broken. She was just out of places to fall. "Come in," he said finally. She hesitated. Pride was a heavy thing, even when hunger was heavier. But the boy swayed on his feet, and that decided it. They stepped inside. The room smelled of pine smoke and iron. Luke tossed a few logs onto the stove, poured water from a kettle, and handed her a cup. Her hands shook as she held it, steam brushing her face. "You live alone?" she asked. He nodded. "Since the war. Since before the fever took my family." She didn't say she was sorry. She knew better. Some losses didn't want sympathy, just silence. For a while, neither spoke. The only sound was Jonas's quiet breathing as he drifted into sleep by the fire. Luke kept glancing at him, at the way his small hand rested against the floorboards, just like his sons once had. When Evelyn finally spoke again, her voice was soft, as if afraid of waking something inside either of them. "If you let him stay, I'll go. You won't have to—" "No." His tone was steady, low. "You're both staying. A boy needs his mother." She blinked, unsure if she'd heard right. People didn't offer things like that anymore. Not out here, not to someone like her. "Why?" she asked. He didn't answer, just looked at the fire as if the flames could explain it better. Outside, the wind kept pushing against the door, but inside, the world went still. Evelyn's heart thudded with something she hadn't felt in years. Safety mixed with fear, like standing on a bridge that might hold or break. Later, when she laid Jonas near the stove and covered him with her shawl, she caught Luke watching quietly. Not the way men watched a woman, but the way a lost traveler looked at a light in the distance, half in disbelief that it was real. She turned away before he could see her eyes fill. Maybe it was exhaustion. Maybe grace, or maybe, after all she'd lost, life was giving her one small, stubborn chance. And for the first time in months, Evelyn Hart let herself breathe. Morning came soft. The kind that makes you forget how hard the night was. Snow melted slow off the roof, dripping like a clock counting borrowed time. Evelyn woke first. For a moment she didn't know where she was. The warmth, the silence, the faint smell of coffee, it all felt like someone else's dream. Then she saw Jonas, curled near the stove, a tiny arm hanging from the blanket, breathing steady. She sat up quietly. Her shawl slipped down her shoulder. The cabin was small, rough-built, but solid. A man's place. Tools stacked where they belonged. A saddle near the door, worn but cared for. Luke was already outside. She heard the scrape of wood, the steady rhythm of someone who had long since learned to live without hurry or company. Evelyn hesitated. She didn't like feeling like a burden. The world had taken enough from her. She wouldn't take from anyone else. Still, when the door opened and cold air swept in around him, she almost smiled. "You're up early," he said, setting a bundle of logs by the stove. "Hard to sleep when you're not sure if you belong," she answered softly. He paused, then poured coffee into a tin cup and slid it across the table. You're here. That's enough for now. It wasn't a promise, but it wasn't pity either. Somehow that made it easier to swallow. They ate in silence. Bread gone stale but warm from the pan, a few dried apples, and coffee so strong it almost burned. Evelyn didn't complain. Her body needed warmth more than taste. Jonas stirred, blinked, and looked between them. Is this our new house, Mama? Evelyn's throat tightened. She brushed his hair back. Just for a little while, sweetheart. Luke didn't correct her, though something in his eyes said he wanted to. When the meal was done, she stood and began to gather dishes. You've done enough, he said. I need to do something, she replied. Work for what we take. He studied her a moment, then nodded toward the barn. There's feed to sort and tack to oil. If you're set on working, that'll do. Evelyn smiled faintly. That'll do. Outside the cold bit harder. But movement helped. She scrubbed buckets, wiped dust from harness straps, and found herself humming an old tune she hadn't sung since before the fever took her husband. It startled her, how sound could rise out of grief like that. Luke came by later, carrying a small hammer. He watched her work without saying much, just the occasional nod. The kind a man gives when words would only ruin what's already right. Where'd you learn to mend tack? He asked finally. My father raised horses. I used to help him when Ma took sick. Guess I remember more than I thought. He smiled a little, just with one corner of his mouth. You handle things steady. She didn't answer, just kept wiping the strap, pretending not to notice the warmth rising to her face. By afternoon, the sun came through the barn slats in golden lines. Jonas ran circles chasing a stray chicken, laughter echoing where silence had lived too long. Luke leaned against the post, pretending not to watch, but every sound of that boy's laughter pulled something loose inside him. Later, when they all came in, the fire burned low but steady. Evelyn stirred soup on the stove, thin but enough for 3. Luke sat across the table, elbows resting on his knees. Do you ever stop working? He asked quietly. She smiled without looking up. Do you? For a moment they both chuckled, and it felt strange, familiar almost, like a sound that belonged in the room. When Jonas finally drifted to sleep again, Evelyn sat near the stove, wrapping her shawl tighter. Luke rose to add another log, the glow catching his face just long enough for her to see something she hadn't before. Kindness, maybe, or loss that looked too much like her own. Neither spoke after that. Words would have broken the peace. But in the hush of that small cabin, something unspoken settled between them. Fragile, like frost that might melt if touched. And for the first time in a long while, Evelyn Hart didn't feel like a guest. She felt kept. By the time spring pushed through the last snow, the Calder place had begun to sound different. Hammers instead of silence, laughter instead of wind. And though Evelyn never said it out loud, she'd started thinking of the ranch's hours instead of his. Every morning had its rhythm now. Luke split wood before the sun came up, steady and wordless as always. Evelyn baked bread, the scent filling the cabin before Jonas even stirred from sleep. It wasn't comfort exactly, more like a truce between two people who'd seen enough loss to stop chasing comfort and just build what they could. That morning, Evelyn was mending a tear in one of Luke's shirts by the window. She'd already washed the floorboards, fed the hens, and set a pot of beans to soak. Her hands worked by habit, but her mind wandered. He never asked where I came from. Maybe he doesn't care, or maybe he just knows it's better not to ask. The door opened, and Luke stepped in, brushing dirt from his gloves. Fence is holding. That boy of yours is getting handy with a hammer. She smiled softly. Jonas likes helping. Says you don't talk much, but he likes the quiet. Luke gave a half laugh, the kind that carried more history than humor. Quiet's safer than noise. Noise gets you noticed. She looked up then. There was something behind his tone, something she'd started hearing more often. A man remembering things he didn't say. War? She asked gently. He nodded, eyes fixed on the fire. Lost too much when it ended. Wife, son, a home I couldn't go back to. Silence hung in the air, not uncomfortable, just thick. Evelyn's needle paused mid-stitch. I'm sorry, she said quietly. Seems the Lord has a strange way of taking what we love most. Luke looked at her then. Really looked. You still believe he's the one taking? She hesitated. Some days, other days, I just think we weren't meant to keep anything forever. He nodded slowly. as if her answer settled something he hadn't realized was bothering him. Maybe that's why it feels strange having you two here. Feels like holding on to something again. Evelyn tried to smile, but her throat tightened. She didn't trust herself to speak, so she went back to stitching. The thread shook a little in her fingers. Outside, Jonas called from the yard, laughing about something. A chicken, maybe. Luke opened the door, and sunlight spilled in, golden and warm. "Go on," he said with a soft grin. "You'll miss the show." She stepped outside, shawl tight around her shoulders. Jonas was chasing a hen that refused to be caught, the air full of his giggles. Evelyn laughed out loud, the sound surprising her. Luke leaned against the doorframe, watching. For a moment, it felt like a scene from someone else's life, a family whole and simple. Later that evening, Evelyn sat by the fire sewing again, Jonas asleep nearby. Luke was carving a small horse from a scrap of pine. His hands were steady, his eyes tired. "What are you making?" she asked. He didn't look up. "A toy. Figured the boy might like something to keep." "That's kind of you." He shrugged. "Kindness don't cost much. Just time." She watched him for a long while, the soft scrape of the knife against wood blending with the crackle of the fire. "You know," she said finally, "for a man who claims to like quiet, you've let a lot of noise back into your life." Luke smiled faintly, not meeting her gaze. "It's the good kind of noise." When the fire burned low, he placed the little carved horse on the table beside Jonas. Evelyn traced its shape with her fingers once he'd gone to his room. Rough edges, simple form but made with care. She whispered into the half-dark, "Maybe we're all just learning how to keep something again." And for the first time in years, she didn't fall asleep afraid of the morning. By early summer, the ranch had found its steady rhythm again. Grass high, fences mended, the scent of wild sage carried by the wind. From a distance, you'd never know how fragile peace could be, how one whisper could knock down what months of silence had built. Evelyn went into town that morning with Jonas. She hadn't been back to Dust Hollow since the winter, and part of her hoped the town had forgotten her face. The streets were busier now, traders, wagons, the clang of horseshoes on dirt. Familiar sounds, but her stomach still twisted. She kept her head low as they walked toward the general store. Inside, the air smelled of flour and kerosene. Mrs. Talbot, the shopkeeper's wife, looked up from behind the counter. The woman's smile didn't reach her eyes. "Well now," she said, dusting her apron. "If it isn't Mrs. Calder's new helper," Evelyn froze. "I'm just buying supplies," she said evenly. "Of course," the woman replied. "Word travels quick, you know. A widow living out at a man's place, no preacher's blessing. People talk." Evelyn's fingers tightened around the coin in her hand. "Let them talk," she said, quieter than she meant, but the whisper spread like wind through dry grass. By the time she left the store, she could feel the stares behind her, sharp, measuring, cruel. Jonas tugged at her sleeve. "Mama, why's everyone looking at us like that?" She knelt beside him, forcing a smile. "Because they don't know better, sweetheart. That's all." But inside her heart burned. Not for herself, she'd survived worse. But for him, for the look he'd carry because of her. When they rode back to the ranch, the air felt heavier. Luke was repairing a gate when they arrived. He noticed her silence before she even stepped down from the wagon. "What happened?" he asked. "Nothing worth repeating." He looked at her, brow furrowing. "Evelyn," she sighed. "They think I'm living here in sin. Think I came to take what's yours." Luke's jaw tightened. He didn't say a word, just went back to his work. The hammer hit wood harder than before. Evelyn watched him, waiting for him to deny it, to say something that would ease the shame curling inside her. But he said nothing, and that silence hurt more than the gossip. That evening, supper was quiet. Jonas talked about chasing rabbits near the creek, but neither adult really heard him. When the boy finally went to bed, the stillness that followed felt like a storm building. "You could have said something," she said finally. He looked up, tired. "To who?" "To them." "To me." "Anything." Luke rubbed his hands over his face. "You think a few words will change a town? Let them talk." "We know what's true." Her eyes flashed. "Do we?" "Because right now it feels like you'd rather let them believe the worst than stand beside me." The weight in the room shifted. Luke opened his mouth, then closed it. "I didn't ask for this," he muttered. Evelyn's voice trembled, but she didn't back down. "And I didn't ask for pity," Luke called her. "You told me we belonged here. Maybe that was just kindness after all. He stood staring at the floorboards like they'd hold the answer. Maybe you should rest. You're tired. It wasn't the words. It was the way he said them. Distant, careful, like shutting a door. She nodded once, quietly. You're right. I should go. When she stepped outside, the night air hit cold against her skin. The prairie stretched endless and silent, and for the first time since winter, she felt that old emptiness come crawling back. Inside, Luke sat alone by the fire, her empty cup still on the table. He could have gone after her. Should have. But pride, old stupid pride, kept him still. The wind slipped through the cracks of the cabin walls, carrying her name like a ghost. And by the time the fire burned low, he realized he'd let her walk out into the dark the same way life had once taken everything else from him. The wind was mean that morning, sharp, cold, full of unfinished words. Luke Calder rode through it anyway, coat collar up, eyes burning from more than the dust. He'd been riding since before sunrise, following tracks half buried under frost. Evelyn's tracks. He'd told himself all week she just needed time, that she'd come back when the sting of gossip faded. But the silence of that cabin, the way the mornings had gone still again, it told a man truths he didn't want to face. When he finally saw her, the relief hit him like a blow. She was walking along the ridge near the creek, shawl drawn tight, Jonas trudging beside her with a small bundle slung over his shoulder. They looked worn but not broken, never broken. Luke slowed his horse, heart hammering like it used to before a gunfight. "Evelyn," he called. She stopped, shoulders stiff. Jonas turned first. "Mr. Calder!" The boy yelled, half smiling, half unsure. Evelyn didn't turn around right away. When she did, her eyes were tired, guarded. "You shouldn't have come," she said. He dismounted slowly, boots crunching over frozen dirt. "Couldn't sit and do nothing." "Not this time. People in that town don't forget, Luke. I left so you wouldn't have to carry their shame too." He shook his head. "It ain't shame I've been carrying. It's the empty place you left." That caught her off guard. She opened her mouth, closed it again. The wind picked up, flinging dust across their boots. Jonas looked between them, sensing something bigger than words passing in the space. Luke took a step closer. "You told me once I saved you from the cold. Truth is, you saved me from the quiet. You and that boy gave me a reason to wake up again." Evelyn blinked hard, fighting the warmth rising in her chest. "You don't know what you're asking for," she said, voice trembling. "A woman like me brings trouble." He smiled faintly, that half-smile she'd grown used to. "Then I'll take it." Trouble and all, Jonas tugged at his mother's hand. "Can we go home now, Mama?" Evelyn looked at the boy, then at Luke, the man who had given them food, a roof, and without saying it, a place to belong. Her throat tightened. "Home," she whispered, as if testing the word after too long. Luke reached out his hand, not demanding, just steady. She hesitated a moment before placing hers in it. His hand was rough, warm, and for the first time in months she didn't feel cold. They rode back together. The trail looked different this time, like the land itself had softened its edges. When they reached the ranch, the barn door creaked in the wind, and a lone lantern swayed from its hook. Luke dismounted first, then lifted Jonas down. Evelyn stepped onto the ground last, her boots sinking into familiar dirt. Inside the cabin, the air still smelled of pine smoke and coffee, just as it had the night they arrived. Evelyn moved slowly, touching the back of the chair, the edge of the stove, reminding herself this was real. Luke set his hat down, turned to her. "We'll fix what they said, all of it. You and the boys stay here proper. I'll ride for the preacher come morning." Her eyes widened. "You'd do that." "I should have done it sooner." Silence filled the room again, but it wasn't the heavy kind this time. It was full, like a deep breath after a long winter. Evelyn walked toward him, her hand brushing his arm. "Luke," she said softly, "we already belong." "Paper or not." He looked at her then, eyes steady. "Maybe. But I want the world to know what I already do." Outside, the first flakes of spring snow began to fall, melting as they touched the warm earth. Inside, the fire caught bright, its light spilling across the table, across the carved wooden horse still waiting there from months ago, and for the first time, it felt like a home, not just a shelter from the cold, but a place built on grace, work, and the quiet kind of love that stays.